members and friends, to our second annual FSACCI webinar on crisis communication. Although we are facing, and I think we'll continue to face, unprecedented challenges, I strongly believe that communication is going to be a key tool as businesses that we'll need to rely on going forward. So it is my absolute pleasure today to introduce to you on the screen Jennifer Stein, who is the Managing Director of GGI Communications, and she's going to be presenting to us today on how to manage internal and external communications, as well as some useful tips and tricks, I think. So following from the presentation from Jennifer, we're going to open up for a Q&A session. So as I mentioned, you are welcome to either raise your hand, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and we will unmute you and you can ask your question directly to Jennifer. Alternatively, you're welcome to use the Q&A box where you can type your question and we will get back to your question accordingly and answer to that. So before I hand over to Jennifer, I'd just also like to remind all companies present today that FSACCI is really leveraging our collective knowledge and diversity as a network. So if you have any specific questions, business-related questions on COVID-19, for example, tax, law, legal, please feel free to check out our dedicated webpage on our website where you are able to ask your question. We have a panel of specialists who can give you some general advice. If you need to be connected to someone with really specific information, also reach out to us and we'll try and connect you with the best person who has the expertise to answer that question as well. And I think just in general, FSACCI, we're really embracing this future of work at this time and taking everything online. So have a look out at all our platforms because we're going to be continuing to connect your business, bring you visibility, and most importantly, utilize this platform and create a space for dialogue where we can share our expertise, share our experiences, and really leverage this diverse network we have. I think it's important more than ever to really take advantage on that, and FSACCI is here to support you in any way we can. So thank you for all of those who are here today, and I think on that note, Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. GGI, just very quickly, we are a long-standing PR and communications agency. We focus very much on reputation management, and within that falls crisis communications, and we do a lot of crisis communications. I'm never sure whether it's a good or a bad thing, and hopefully some of the learnings and some of the experience that we've got are going to come across during the session. I'm going to go straight into a slideshow and start talking, and as Amy said, any questions, any comments, let's just go through them all in detail afterwards. Let's just talk about crises in general. Crises are inevitable. If there's one thing that you can be sure of from a corporate perspective, a crisis is going to happen. But it's also important to note, and this is generally speaking, more than 75% of corporate crises are triggered from within. This is good news because it means that companies have a greater degree of control, both in preventing a potential crisis from happening and in containing them and managing them when they do happen. And I have to tell you that if any company is going to have a crisis, this is a good time for it to happen. If you're going to have a sexual harassment issue, if you're going to have a product contamination issue, if you're going to have a financial mismanagement issue, this is now, because I think that realistically 95% of media coverage in South Africa and around the world today is dedicated purely to coronavirus. So bear that in mind. From a crisis planning and preparation perspective, there are a number of triggers and issues which pretty much underline any crisis. The issues range from environmental and sustainability, the availability of materials, less demand for product, CSI, cyber threats, which are becoming more and more apparent, mismanagement, corruption, etc., empowerment of labor, and IP or trademark infringement. And those are the general issues that generally tend to trigger a crisis. In terms of traditional crisis triggers, we generally break them down into internal and external factors. And you can see there's a wide range. Terrorism, natural disasters, activism issues, structural ownership, consumer issues, competitors, workplace injuries, labor, product recalls. There is a broad range of factors which trigger a traditional crisis. But there's one that's missing, and this is the one that we're faced with now. And I picked up an article last week which was called Time to Dust Off the Pandemic Plan. And allied to that was some research that found the bulk of companies headquartered in Asia showed that most of them did not have a formal response for this. Nobody has a pandemic plan. That is the reality of the world that we're living in. And I'm going to come back to this, so bookmark it. Generally speaking, from a crisis, we always say to clients that while you can't prepare for a crisis when you're in the middle of one, and that really just highlights the importance of crisis planning and preparation. What we do know from a crisis is that the only thing that can be expected is the unexpected. But this one's different. It's on a different scale. And I think if you had to ask a doomsayer to predict a worst case scenario, this would be it. It's the most unexpected crisis of the most unimagined proportions and the most unimagined implications. I don't think that any of us here would ever have thought that by tonight we'd be on lockdown. A week ago, it wasn't even on the agenda. So no matter how well prepared an organization is for a crisis, this one has taken everybody by surprise. And what we're finding with our clients, with agents, global agencies with whom we work on a regular basis, is that even the best laid plans are not sufficient for this level of crisis. Millions of people are on lockdown. This is Paris, which I thought was relevant for this audience, but there are similar scenes in London, New York, Sydney, Madrid, all around the world. And pretty much by tonight and tomorrow, this is what all of South Africa is going to look like. And there's another well-known saying in crisis communications, and it is, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control what you do about it. And while there are hundreds of factors about the corona crisis that we can't control, and in fact, day by day, we're watching it escalate, and we're watching the paradigms change on an ongoing basis. What we can control is how we're communicating about it, both internally and externally. I think firstly, it is absolutely crucial that we make sure that we're dealing with accurate information. Times of crisis generally are confusing and frightening, and it just results in an amplification of speculation, conspiracy theories, rumors, factually incorrect content. Social media very much fuels this, and consumers fuel this. So what we need to guarantee is that we're dealing with facts and not fiction, real information and not rumor. So the first thing to take note of is that it's really good to have a broad base of knowledge of which sources to trust in certain situations. And it's always advisable to consult 3 to 5 reputable sources for a point of view or recommendation. Locally, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases and the Department of Health, they are doing a sterling job in communicating. And they've been doing it for weeks, much of which we haven't seen. Globally, World Health Organization are really, really, really on top of this. The Center for Disease Control in the States, also excellent output, although slightly, it's often more biased towards the US audience. Secondly, following on from that, it's crucial to understand the goals of the communication being delivered. This isn't a time to try and market or sell, but it is the ideal time to try and reinforce the values that define leading organizations. So this is Greg Harvey. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. I only heard of him a couple of days ago. Jerry Harvey. He is the co-founder and executive chairman of a department store in Australia called Harvey Norman. And he sparked absolute outrage for dismissing the severity of the pandemic and suggesting that it provided a good opportunity for him to sell freezers, air purifiers, and other products. And he was speaking on Australian TV, and he said that he gloated, he was pleased that their sales were up 9% last year. And he said there'd been a 300% spike in the sale of freezers, while air purifiers were up by 100%. These are his comments. We've got enough salespeople, enough customers, and we're doing really good business. This is a nice big shop. We don't have to get really close to each other. We don't have to touch. You can come into the shop and you're 100% okay. Then he said, It's not the Spanish flu that killed 15 million people after the First World War. Why are we so scared about getting this virus? There's nothing to be scared of. He was subsequently interviewed on 60 Minutes in Australia, and the interviewer reminded him that thousands have already died in China and Italy, and that the death rates are escalating daily, and this is how he responded. But that's there and we're here. I'm 80. I should be really scared, but guess what? I'm not scared. I've had a wonderful life and will keep on going as if nothing's happened. He was absolutely slammed on social media. He's broken every single PR book rule. It was a comment, it was tone deaf, it was poor timing, and as I said, he's just been slammed. And these are 3 examples of thousands of tweets that followed this. What should he have done? He could have turned it into an opportunity to donate freezers or air purifiers to old age homes, to donate computers and Wi-Fi dongles to students who didn't have access to that kind of material. So again, just tone deaf and completely the wrong thing to do. But having said all of this, it's worth taking a step back and looking at the kind of situation that we're in and trying to bed down how to communicate to audiences and stakeholders in the time of an unprecedented crisis. And we've tried to break it down into 4 fairly simple points. Okay, the first one is determine who needs to know what. And we're finding that as people scramble to make sense of a world that doesn't make any sense anymore, determining who needs to know what is so often lost, even though it's generally common sense and it's generally human nature. Firstly, the first audience that every organization should reach out to is the employee community. There's so much unease. It's such a sensitive issue. There is so much anxiety that is a natural follow-on from the situation that we're living in. People are feeling anxious, probably more anxious now than they have in years. I mean, I'm feeling anxious and I'm not a particularly anxious person. And I think that's just being replicated everywhere. So regular communications with staff, it can put employees at ease while also ensuring that critical business needs are still being addressed through an upheaval. And that's the difficult part. How do you balance the two? And I think this is where business continuity plans come into effect. And hopefully the companies you work for have a business continuity plan, which at times like this is paramount and which go a long way to calming a wide group of stakeholders. And it's also something that communications plugs into on so many levels. Generally speaking, most companies think that they'll never use these plans. And ideally, I think in the past, they have very seldom had to be used in the bigger scheme of things. But it's like a good insurance policy. You don't need it until you need it. And what they do, effective business plans do a few things. And again, communications has a role in all of this. They allow companies to lean on technology so that you can manage day-to-day communications, be they internally or externally. Whatever systems or tools best allow your organization to communicate consistently and clearly with staff, because people need that. They need to know that you're on top of things. They need to know that they can be reassured. They need to know that if they're part of the essential services, what is going to happen? What are the protocols? What are the steps that have been taken to safeguard them? What are you doing to try and contain and combat the virus in their immediate working environment? If they're on lockdown, are their salaries going to be paid? And they're just thousands and thousands of questions that are coming from this. It's also a really good time to demonstrate a value proposition to staff. And there's no better time than a critical issue to show and not tell how important staff are to an organization. Staff will judge a company and management on the steps you take to ensure their safety. Some companies have gone the extra mile by offering access to medical professionals or by offering emotional support hotlines. Externally, many companies see a crisis as a time to ramp up or introduce CSI initiatives. And these can be valuable, but, and there's always a but, it's always good to ensure that what you're doing for people outside your 4 walls is being replicated internally. Don't be the company donating sanitizer when customer-facing staff are doing without. You've got to create that balance. You've got to create that equality, and you've got to communicate it. include the whole organization and tweak on the go. And I think in this kind of market, it is particularly difficult because so many of us work in organizations where you literally have warehouse packers, floor managers, right up to executive management. How you communicate and what you communicate with them are generally completely different in terms of the manner. But we've got to make sure that the messaging and the content stays the same and that it's completely cohesive and continuous. Again, it's something that has to be tweaked on the go. And throughout the last few weeks, many companies have been tweaking their business continuity plans to make sure that teams are aligned, to make sure that communication is going out as and when relevant to the relevant levels of staff. Of course, customers are another key audience that is critical to communicate with. And just as companies are using technology to communicate with staff during this crisis, do the same thing with customers. We work with a number of companies who are continuing to provide essential services. Many of them are doing exactly what we're doing now. They're going onto technology platforms to interface, to interact, and they're putting measures in place that completely sideline the traditional face-to-face meetings. It's also really good, and again, this is where a business continuity plan comes into play, to help knowing which technology can best be deployed in any given situation. Times of crisis are periods of time where being present with your customers is critical. It's critical to show them that you value them, that you're operating in the same reality, that you're not isolated off in another place caring only about profit while they worry about the safety and the world around them. So again, all of this, it's a balancing act. And then we've put government here, and I've put them in grey rather than red, because they're another really important stakeholder for some organizations. We're seeing corporates demonstrate their commitment and citizenship through offers of monetary, product, and even personnel support. And these moves go a long way towards showing that a company or brand takes its role in a larger culture and society seriously. Not everybody can do this at government level. There are many organizations who are reaching out to help local charities, local community, their local staff. But I think that outreach and showing and living your values is what's coming into here. Step 2, refine your messaging. Work with your communications team and listen to your gut. Generally, you know exactly what needs to be messaged and communicated to them. Ideally, having said that, you want to create your messages and leave out anything that's controversial, anything that is political. In a situation that we're living in now, we don't want to fuel panic, but what you do need to do is take the necessary steps to be prudent. And when messaging in a crisis situation, and on paper, this is no different, we always talk about epic values. Firstly, empathy, understanding the thoughts and needs of others. Secondly, patience, taking the time to understand before we act. And I think this is a critical one, because don't have a knee-jerk reaction to something. Thirdly, integrity, honesty and truth in all situations. And lastly, courage, doing what is right even when it's difficult. And I think that's really something that is worth pondering right now. Are we doing right by our staff? Are we doing right by our customers? Are we doing right by our suppliers? Are we doing right for our community? Other values to think of from a messaging perspective are: be factual, be responsible, be apolitical, be sensitive. It's a strange, surreal time for everybody, but I think if you go back to basics with messaging and what you're trying to communicate to people, and if you go by epic values, you're pretty much well on the way there. Step 3, advise your stakeholders. And guys, this is a moving target, which is why there's so many of them there. It really is a moving target. But having said that, nothing builds trust throughout an issue or a crisis better than a steady flow of responsible information that keeps everybody involved. Companies want to stay close to all aspects of a response to a crisis, and they need to make sure that they're relaying the most recent and relevant information to all their stakeholders. And again, that's a challenge, the most recent and the most relevant, because we are being flooded by updates, by changes, by goalposts that are moving, by events which, you know, as I said earlier, which a couple of days ago would have been pretty much unimaginable. But again, it goes back to determining who needs to know what and ensuring that you've got the right kind of communication channels to communicate to them. And that in turn goes back to crisis preparation and planning, and that you can't prepare for a crisis when you are in the middle of one. But as I said, this is a moving target. And if you recall what I said earlier, most companies don't have a formal response plan for something of this scope and magnitude, because virtually no one's experienced this before. And because things are moving so fast, most communicators simply don't have the time or the bandwidth to be proactive. Literally, most of us, and I'm seeing this with our clients, I'm seeing it with their people, most of us are simply trying to keep up and not make mistakes. And that's fine. That's fine. We're doing the best we can under the most unbelievably trying circumstances. But it's difficult because now more than ever is when communicators need to view everything from a 360-degree approach. Having said that, and there's so many ifs and buts here, but having said that, we're also seeing clients focusing primarily on internal communications. And it goes back to staff being your most important constituent. Internally, the biggest concern is an outbreak amongst staff, protocols, procedures, legal requirements, and so on. And there are hundreds. And hopefully once we've gone into lockdown, some of those fears, some of those sensitivities will start to diminish, but they've been unbelievably real for all of us and for all of our staff and for all of our constituencies for the last 2 weeks or 10 days. If you haven't already, and I hope you have, communicate frequently the steps you have taken, the measures you've put in place, the protocols that you are implementing, how things change, if they change, why they are changing. In situations like this, you actually cannot over-communicate. But it's also vital here that you balance the frequency of communications with calmness and facts. You need to show external audiences what you're doing to contain and combat the virus. Again, communicate clearly where it's relevant. Convey to consumers or your customers how your product or services can help people, but don't be opportunistic. Seriously, this isn't the right time. I saw a headline this morning. I think Coca-Cola in the UK is stopping all marketing activities. A number of clients are stopping all marketing activities. We've stopped boosting social media content for clients who are not directly involved in the production of essential goods. It's time to, and it's right, to take a step back. And again, it goes about, it's having the courage to do what is right rather than doing what is in your marketing or communications plan. And then for multinationals, the challenge is to be aligned globally across staff and external audiences, yet to ensure that communication aligns to local culture and expectations, which again in this market is a challenge that I'm sure all of the multinationals present are fully aware of, but it's just exacerbated now. Step 4, live your values. Whether your values are innovation, partnership, excellence, trust, etc., etc., etc. I mean, these are 4 that I've just pulled out. Live your values. None of us wants a crisis to happen. But when a crisis does happen, there's no better time to demonstrate what you stand for as a company. What are the values that define you? How do you let them shine through? And if you don't let them shine through now, are they really indicative of how your company operates and what its purpose is to the world? Don't tell your staff you care about their well-being above all else, yet expect them to report for work if one of their colleagues has tested positive. Again, it's about being sensitive and having the courage to do the right thing. I think really importantly, generally speaking, and now, the crisis can represent a show, not tell moment in your corporate reputation process. So if you're a logistics firm, can you channel resources into transporting medical equipment to hospitals? If you're a plastics manufacturer, can you switch quickly to protective clothing for medical staff? Dyson in the UK, vacuum cleaner manufacturers, they're using their technology to start manufacturing ventilators. It's about thinking a little bit laterally about what you've got and how you can help. But what is central to all of this to all of these actions is that using your experience or brand capital to help during a crisis, it's not about commercial advantage or profit. It's about doing the right thing for society and showing a company's true values and citizenships. And those are probably 4 of the primary steps that we need to be aware of. But there's one last element that underpins all of this, and it's trust. From my perspective, personally, our government, who's not previously renowned for trust and integrity, is leading the way we would expect developed nations to lead. And the levels of trust in government, based purely on how they are handling the crisis, are probably higher than ever. And corporates would do well to emulate that approach. While time-tested virtues like transparency, empathy, and honesty are still absolutely fundamental, managing a crisis like the coronavirus outbreak requires all communicators, internal and external, to be able to access accurate information and turn it around quickly as and when needed. It's the time to communicate openly about the actions you're taking to create awareness. What are you doing to contain and combat the virus? What are you doing to set up so that all your staff can work properly remotely? How are you protecting people? How are you instilling confidence and enhancing credibility? And all of that adds up to building trust. And seriously, without it, messages are meaningless and carry no weight. With it, you will add weight to what you're communicating. And I'm going to leave you with one last thought. And I once worked for a client who said, steal with pride. And that's exactly what I've done. I'm stealing with pride because I can't put this into better words. And it's something that the Minister of Trade and Industry said 2 days ago. And he said, it's a learning experience for everybody. We are in something that societies don't prepare for. This is not even a once-in-a-generation type of event. This is an event that is unprecedented. Therefore, particularly the speed at which we need to move is unusual. We appeal right across our society for tolerance in working together. We are going to have to care for each other during this period, and a critical part of this is just tolerance. Our job is now, all of us, to ensure the generosity of spirit is there to get us through this period. And that applies as much to the general public and to South Africa as it does to the people on this webinar.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I think particularly to end off with the words of Patel is a nice way to gather some community spirit there.
That's why I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so now what we're going to do, I see we already have one hand up. So for all those who have joined us a little bit late, Taryn, we'll get to you now. If anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we will unmute you and you're welcome to ask a question directly to Jennifer. Alternatively, if you're a little bit shy and you prefer the comfort of your home, you're welcome to type your question in the Q&A box, which is located below. So on that note, we're going to go to Taryn.
And if anybody's at home and if their kids interrupt and if their dogs bark, that's just fine. We're all in this together.
Perfect. All right, Taryn, how are you?
Fine, thank you very much. I just want to say thank you very, very much for an amazing presentation. I think it's a very difficult time for all of us. I'm the General Manager of Peer Fiber South Africa, and it's a matter of trying to create unity amongst the staff members, the employees, and I just sometimes find it quite hard in a time like this in what your recommendations would be as to, again, I know you say communications on a regular basis, but I mean, an email a day, an email a week, you know, I mean, what is, you know, without people feeling totally bombarded by information at the same time? What do you feel is a fair balance?
So that is the difficulty. And, you know, as I said, we're working with a moving target. There's no blanket rule. I think a lot of it depends on the organization. We are currently working with one of the bigger retail groups who will be staying open during the lockdown. Their communications are going out 4 or 5 times a day, not always to the same stakeholders, but 4 or 5 times a day, literally, as something changes, as we get an update from government, as new rules come into play, we are communicating with them. Other companies may find it fine to communicate once a day. I really don't think at this stage it's not clear black and white.
Okay, thank you ever so
but
much.
Again, listen to your gut. If you feel, and put yourself in other people's shoes. And I think, generally speaking, if you listen to your gut, you know what people need to know and when they need to know it. We're speaking to clients now who say, oh, I probably should have done this yesterday. And yeah, you probably should have.
I think for us, our value proposition or our purpose statement is taking care, living better. And I think it's exactly that right now, is how do we take care and how do we live better in the times that we currently faced and the ever-changing environment. So thank you very much. It was a very informative TC. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for that.
For joining us, Taryn. It's good to have you here. All right. Do we have any further questions from any of the audience? You're welcome to either type it down below or just raise your hand and we will get to you. I think this is the perfect opportunity now. We're all going to have to be communicating. So if you have any questions, I see we have Philo from Copago. I don't know if Philo, you have any questions. I see we have Peugeot here today. We have Melanie, our colleague at FSACCI. We have Marissa Jacobs, Kevin. Does anyone have any questions? Please feel free to lean on the expertise of Jennifer today. Because it's the perfect opportunity in which to... Okay, I see we have a question. Soline, you can unmute yourself at the bottom left.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I manage a farm, a wine farm, and 80% of my staff, they don't have email access, they don't have internet access. Some of them don't even have WhatsApp access. So communication before the lockdown, I've communicated as much as I could, but after, that's going to be a nightmare. I really want to keep contact with them and reassure them, because they are all scared to death to lose their job, much more than of the virus itself. They are just scared to lose their jobs. I don't know if I feel very, very lost. I don't know if anybody is in the same situation and has idea, but I'm sending them back to the townships and I won't be able to see them. And we've put in place, I've given them some cash to get data, but they will use it for, and I will never blame them if they use it for something else. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And, I think we all need to do the best job we can now under really, really trying circumstances. And I think your circumstances are really, really trying. They're heartbreaking. I agree with you 100%. Give them cash, let them buy some airtime, and probably consider just dropping them a little bit of extra cash during, so they can stay connected to the best of your ability. You're working within limitation. Just to the best of your ability, so that you can keep lines of communication open.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think that's quite typical, particularly in South Africa. I think that will definitely compound the challenges that we have in terms of connectivity. Living circumstances. I think that's going to play a even bigger factor and compound the sort of crisis we faced with at the moment. Okay, I have a comment and a question, so I'll deal with the question first, and then afterwards I'll get to the comment. So we have a question from Angelica, and she asks, can you clarify the why of Coca-Cola stopping its marketing activity that you mentioned before? Do you know the rationale behind that, Jennifer?
I'm going to be 100% completely honest and say I just skimmed over headlines, and that was one of them. I'm not even going to try and give you a rationale, but I think it's about, I don't know how frivolous, how serious their marketing plans or their marketing activity for the next few weeks would have been, but it was probably in light of, is it relevant to have this out in the marketplace in the here and now? Mm-hmm. I think that probably would have been the basis for that decision. And I think it stands for everyone. Am I communicating the right tone? Am I communicating the right content? Am I saying the right things? How is it going to be received by my constituents? And it was probably based on that.
Okay, all right. Yeah. And then I see we have please, if there's anyone's questions, please type or raise your hand and we'll get to you. I see we have someone who's made a comment, and their advice is that I quote, "For business and staff, we need to enforce and instill a feel of business as usual on a private basis, and we can help employees to also take the time to reflect and to enjoy what is an unusual break." For all, there are many positives as well as to the 21 days of lockdown. So in terms, I don't know if you have a comment on what you think of that statement, sort of that we need to maintain a feel of the business as usual. What would you advise on that to any companies who are, I think in our interactions as well, it's been a quite common thing. We need to sort of maintain as much as possible business as usual, but I don't know what your thoughts on that.
So again, it's about striking a balance. It's about striking the balance that at the end of 21 days, we want to come out, all of us, with companies that are still operational, that with our heads above water, we want to come out as best as we can. Having said that, I agree 100% with what Kevin said. In fact, I said to my team yesterday, I said, you can still be in bed at 20 past, because we're doing, with my team, I'm doing daily Zoom calls at 9 o'clock and then again at 4 o'clock, all of us
exactly
together.
The same team. We have a 9 o'clock with our coffee on the...
Exactly. So I said, if you want to be in bed till 8:30, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. If you want to sit in front of the screen in pajamas, that's fine. If you're doing a call with a client, don't be in your pajamas. But there's going to be less of a frenetic, you don't have a deadline, you don't have a bus to catch, you don't have a taxi to catch, you don't have to work your way through traffic in the morning. So absolutely, it's business as usual as far as day-to-day delivery is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
But take the opportunity to rather enjoy the elements of lockdown that you can, rather than moaning about it, because moaning is not going to change anything.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is. It's a philosophy and it's a mindset.
Okay, perfect. And then do we have any more questions? Don't be shy, please. This is a nice opportunity to ask them. Okay, Taryn, you're live again. Just hang on, let us. Perfect. Hi, Taryn.
This is more of a suggestion than really a question as such. Something that I was going to be suggesting to my employees was, in order to take the positive out of it, I think over the next few days, we're going to have lots of things of, I wish I could have pizza. I wish I could give someone a hug. Is start a I wish jar. Write these things down on a daily basis. And when this is all over, take one of these things out of the jar on a daily basis and go and complete it. Yeah. It will make us reflect back on the hard times that we're going through right now, ultimately where makes us appreciate things that much more.
Yeah, so true. That's why I said it's a mindset. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And I think also from the FSACCI team side, of course, we work very closely with one another as well. And I think it's important, particularly with the people you spend majority of your day with on a daily basis, to not completely cut all that communication and really try and replicate some of the good interactions you have on a daily basis. All right, we have a second question from Angelica. I'll just read it out in case not everyone is able to see it. So, in our communication to stakeholders, do you advise that we have 21 days as a reference point, or do we exercise further caution in our communication, allowing for possibility that 21 days may be extended further and possibly considerably further?
None of us knows. None of us knows. I would say don't put a stake in the ground for anything. We're all hoping for 21 days. But I think all of us, in our heart of hearts, know that there's a really good chance that it'll be extended beyond that. And how much beyond that, I don't think anybody can answer that. So, I think it's about talking to, hopefully at the end of 21 days, but there's a really good chance that this is going to continue for longer.
And what do you think of in terms of like a communication? Because I think a lot of the businesses in our organization that sort of say, okay, let's reassess mid-April, let's reassess. And what do you think about like sort of creating communication sort of markers and say, okay, this is what we're doing for the next 21 days while we're on lockdown. We'll reassess, or how do you sort of manage do you need to segment the communication in terms of like milestones, if that makes sense? Or
I think it is, I think it's good to put milestones down. I think it's good to put targets down, whether the targets are to have something completed or a date in which to try and reactivate something. But again, there's got to be an element of flexibility underpinning that, because none of us knows what's going to happen at the end of 21 days.
Mm-hmm.
So put them there as guidelines, but not firm markers.
Okay, all right, perfect. Do we have any other questions? No, from the Q&A. I see we have another comment from Kevin, who says, so some of the positives: I can organize my time and the way I want. 2, it is an opportunity to help others. We are all helping by staying at home. 3, time to reconsider all my options. 4, it actually takes 21 days to make a change and to internal change in one's behavior. 5, you are not alone and ask for help, and we're lucky to be healthy. 7, there's a huge positive impact on the environment. Thank you very much, Kevin, for providing us with some positives as we slowly approach this lockdown later today. We have another question from Angelica. Thank you for all the questions, Angelica. And this one reads, can we reach out to you in the course of the lockdown for advice if further required?
With pleasure. With pleasure. Amy's got my contact details.
Yes, and I think on that note, are you happy to share the PowerPoint presentation, Jennifer?
Yes, of course. Can I send it to you?
Yes, perfect. So if you send it to me, I will send it. We have the contacts of everyone here today. So what I'll do is I'll send through that. And I think we can also send through an extract of the video today of the presentation on our social media. And please feel free at this time, like I remind you, it's really from FSACCI side as a platform, our idea is to connect people. And really, I think this is the most important time. So if you have any questions or you need to be connected to people that will really assist you, please feel free to connect with us, and we will put you in contact with the relevant people and try and support where we can and make sure this is as smooth as possible. So I will, if any of you would like the contact of Jennifer, please get in touch with me. We'll also distribute the slideshow just to give you a recap that you can go over. And we have a Q&A. Thank you very much, Sandrine. Thanks for your comment. It's much appreciated. Do we have any further questions before I ask my question? From any of the attendees, final questions before we close down? I think everyone's still processing and a bit shy today. Please, we welcome all questions and dialogue. It's the perfect opportunity to do so. I see there's a lot of people from Peugeot. I don't know if Peugeot has any questions for Jennifer directly. Sandrine, Cheryl Govender, Lexalio, anyone's got questions? Philo of Capago, do you have any questions? No? All right, I have one question, and I think it might be a difficult one, but it's always a good to challenge our panelists. So for those companies, I mean, you've spoken a lot about having plans in place and sort of we forget the rule book. For those who don't, what do you think is, I mean, is this the time to start creating those emergency plannings? Or what do you advise to people? Is it just to communicate as best you can, trust your gut at the moment? What is the kind of thing, I think for particularly bigger organizations now, when you're managing a lot of people, they should have these things in place. But I think a lot of companies don't. What would you advise in that respect?
So you should have it in place. The reality is you can't plan for a crisis when you're in the middle of one. You just can't.
Yeah.
If you're in the middle of a crisis, and we all are, I think we're all expending energy on, as I said, it's a moving target. We are all expending energy on doing the best we can and literally trying not to make mistakes. I don't think any of us have the bandwidth now. Creating a crisis, sort of putting crisis communications plans in place are time consuming. They need a lot of thought, they need a lot of input. This isn't the right time to do it. But I think what it does highlight is how organizations are caught on the back foot if those plans aren't in place. And even if those plans don't directly address a specific issue or crisis, the bulk of the legwork and the bulk of the homework has been done. And it's really easy to tweak something when you've got a strong foundation, rather than have to start from scratch and not know who your team is, who's responsible for what, who's responsible for liaison, where do we bring in health and safety, when do we bring in legal, when do we bring in HR, proper plans set out all of that. You can't do that on the run. So I think for now, again, it's listen to your heart, and in your heart of heart what the right thing is to do and say. Yeah. And just do the best you can under really, really difficult circumstances. And I think also really useful is try and put yourself in the other person's shoes. What are they feeling? What are they sensitive to? And you can't always completely address all of those, but it's good to try and take the opposing view, because often that guides how you communicate to people, and that's where those epic values come into play.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think particularly challenging will be, like you said, those multinationals who have a lot of their guidelines are set internationally, particularly French companies in Paris. But of course, you now need to communicate with a very specific community and audience. And I think, I suppose, flexibility will need to be employed in those circumstances.
Yeah.
We have another question from Sandrine, and it states, do you think we need to begin to do marketing / communication with customers just before the 21 days or wait until it is over?
I think put plans in place. Let's hope and assume and be positive that this will only last for 21 days, and have plans in place that assume that at the end of 21 days, things are going to go pretty much back to normal, and we can then start communicating about that. But I think also be cognizant of the fact that it might not be 21 days, but once that planning and preparation has happened, whether it's 21 days or 28 days, you're still prepared when it's time to start communicating. So it sort of a little bit contradicts what I said in that you can't plan for a crisis when you're in the middle of one, but we now have the luxury of 3 weeks to be able to think about what happens from the 16th or 17th of April onwards. What do I need to do between now and then? Who do I need to communicate with? Assuming that lockdown is going to be lifted, what do I need to say to them? Good time to put all of those elements and points into place, but understand that they may need to be put on ice.
Yeah, and I suppose if we are to continue with the lockdown beyond the 21 days as well, you can't, I mean, as a business, I suppose it's quite worrying. So you have 3 weeks of not communicating at all with your customers, but doing the internal communications. But after that sort of 3 week mark, it starts to get quite long. I suppose you need to start communicating on something, because otherwise, say we go into months and stuff, you're not communicating with your customer base. And then we come out of this, and it's sort of, again, I think a lot of information all the marketing is going to start up again, and it's going to be, what do you think is an appropriate time? Or is it, again, a gut feeling? We see how it goes. Let's reassess after the 3 weeks.
So, what Kevin's comment earlier about it's business as usual, it is business as usual, even though the circumstances are unprecedented, they are surreal. I mean, we're living in a movie. We are literally living in a movie. And it's about balancing that. If you normally go for a 3 week period without communicating to your stakeholders, that's fine. But if you have tools and channels that allow for regular communication, don't stop that. It's your content that may change and your messaging that may change, but don't have a complete communication shutdown. I think business as usual needs to underpin all of the communications to the best of our ability. And again, you can't put a blanket rule on this.
Okay. I think we have another question from Charlize. Thanks for all the questions so far. So this one reads, if you are in a customer-facing environment on social media, you could still potentially keep in touch with your customers in a different way, adding value to their lives, sharing thoughtful content, and strengthening your brand values. You could be a friend during this time for them. Would you agree with that?
Yes, completely. I think as long as it's on the understanding that you're not here to sell, you're not here to be opportunistic, but if you can empathize, if you can educate, if you can provide a little bit of relevant lightheartedness, as long as it's appropriate. Again, it's the tone. Just be sensitive to the tone.
And then, like you say, I can imagine it's quite a fine line. Like you say, now we need to, if we have that platform and that opportunity to engage and to particularly to educate, of course, I suppose you might also need to be careful where, as an organization, you're getting this information from. And is it relevant to be recommunicating certain, for example, if you're using the World Health Organization or the Department of Health in South Africa as your key resources and communicating with your customers, for example, on social media, is it relevant to be duplicating that kind of content to your specific base when they're probably getting it from elsewhere as a source. What do your, I don't know if you have any.
Yes, it is relevant. It is relevant because you're playing up the frequency, and your messaging is going to be the same as theirs. And in fact, we're doing some of that with some of our clients where it's relevant, and we're saying, the World Health Organization has said that, and we completely agree with them. So we're acknowledging them. We are clearly attributing the content to them. We may be giving a little bit of our own interpretation, but again, it's about relying on a fewer number of reliable, reputable sources and focusing purely on that. And I think from the World Health Organization, from National Department of Health, NICD perspective, the more their messages are communicated, the more there is a chance of them landing and maybe and filtering in.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Any further questions from our attendees today? Thank you for the ones thus far. Any further questions? Else, I think we will end off quite shortly. Is there any further questions? Please feel free to raise your hand or to type in the Q&A. No more questions. All right, perfect. So I think on that note, we can conclude. If there's anyone, thank you, Kevin, again. We thank you and stay safe. But I think that's a great way to end off. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for joining us today. Of course, Jennifer, for those who didn't get, is the Managing Director at GGI Communications, a member of the French Chamber. We'll be distributing the slide and presentation to you all later today, so feel free to share it and pass it along. I think, like Jennifer said, the more people have this knowledge, the more valuable it is. And then, of course, if you have, we've dealt quite generally today with some things we need to do and not do, and the type of climate that we're operating in during this crisis. If you have any specific business questions that are specific to your circumstances and you would like to get a little bit more advice, please do contact us and we will put you in touch with Jennifer directly, and I'm sure she'd be more than happy to assist you at this time. And on that note, thank you very much, Jennifer, for lending your expertise and your time just moments away from a lockdown. And to all our members and our friends who participated today, thank you very much. I think on behalf of Jennifer and the French Chamber as well, please stay safe, stay sane, and remember to communicate.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
bye.